It started out innocently enough. I was using an online forum where people share their lives, and at first it was just a simple conversation. But over time, I began to notice a man who started showing up in my posts more and more, always lingering just a little too long in my comment threads. At first I ignored it. I figured he was just an enthusiastic participant or someone with strong opinions, but his messages didn't feel normal. He began saying he knew where I lived, commenting on places I visited, and it seemed like he was following everything I was doing online, even things I hadn't shared publicly yet. It didn't happen overnight. It was subtle. I remember the first time he mentioned the city I grew up in. There was nothing about it in my profile. Then, one evening, he referenced the cafe where I used to work part-time during college. That was when my stomach twisted, and I realized something wasn't right. It happened gradually. First he appeared on Reddit. Then he started finding me on other social media platforms. He knew personal details, and that began making me feel uncomfortably exposed. My sense of peace disappeared. I started double-checking my privacy settings, deleting old posts, changing usernames, anything to obscure my digital trail. But it felt like trying to hold back the tide with my bare hands. I tried to ignore him, block him, change my profiles, but somehow, he still found me. Unidentified phone calls, messages at odd hours, and that constant feeling that he was watching my every move started to weigh heavily on my mind. The messages became more intense, not threatening at first, but too persistent, filled with details that made my heart race whenever my phone buzzed. Sleep became difficult. I would wake in the middle of the night, convinced I heard a notification, only to stare at a silent screen. Every sound in my apartment seemed amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of floorboards, even the wind against the windows. Everything felt like it might be connected, part of some puzzle I couldn't solve. Then the messages stopped for a brief moment. I breathed a little easier, thinking maybe this was the turning point. But that calm didn't last long. A couple of nights later, an email arrived with a photo attached, a photo taken in broad daylight of my street, but from an angle only someone standing outside my house could have captured. Panic hit me in waves. I checked every lock in my apartment. I even drew the curtains and refused to open the blinds during the day. I felt trapped in my own home, constantly flicking my head toward every passing car or footstep on the sidewalk, convinced it was him lurking just out of sight. Eventually, I realized it wasn't just virtual. He began showing up in places I frequented in real life. He would be in restaurants I visited, on the streets I walked, always just outside my field of vision. But I knew he was there. I started to see him in reflections, in passing car windows, in the polished surface of store displays, even when I knew he wasn't there. My own mind began turning every shadow into something sinister. That's when I understood that this wasn't just discomfort. It was stalking. That feeling of having someone always behind you, studying your steps, knowing more than they should. It destroyed my peace and left deep scars. I found myself scanning crowds, checking rearview mirrors obsessively, convinced at any moment he would step out from the shadows. When I finally told someone I trusted and involved authorities, he still wasn't arrested. But I had to completely change my habits, routines, and even my social environments to feel safe again. I moved far from the neighborhoods I used to love, changed phone numbers, and started fresh on new social platforms with no connections to my old online presence. That experience, the real, constant, non-imagined fear, is something I will never forget. Even now, whenever I see a notification pop up on my screen, my heart still skips a beat, as if he hasn't disappeared at all, as if he's still out there, watching, waiting for the next moment to show up again. I'd never taken supernatural things seriously. At least, not until that night. For years, I worked night security, and one of my regular duties was locking the gates of an old cemetery in the town where I lived. It was huge. Old cemeteries often are, with tombstones scattered across rolling hills and narrow paths beneath twisted trees, their branches like skeletal hands in the dark. Most nights were boring, just lights, silence, and the wind brushing against the gravestones. I'd even joke that the job was almost therapeutic, until the night everything changed. It was a regular Monday. I'd finished my rounds around 11:30 p.m., and instinctively, I always switched on the truck headlights and trained them on the gate to check for anyone hiding before locking up. But on that night, after confirming nothing was in sight, I did something strange. I glanced back one last time before closing the gate. The first time I ever did that without any real reason. And that's when I saw her. About 15 meters ahead, leaning against a tall tombstone, stood a woman. I froze for a second. No one would expect to find someone here at that hour, let alone alone, standing perfectly still in the dark. The way she blended into the shadows, almost as if she was the shadows, made my skin crawl. She was ordinary, dark jeans, a plain white shirt. But what unnerved me most was the emptiness in her expression. She wasn't looking at me. She just was, as though gazing at some point I couldn't see. There was something disturbingly calm in the way she held herself, like she had been waiting forever for someone. Or something. For a moment, everything stood still, like time itself had slowed. My chest tightened, and a sensation I'd never felt before crept up my throat. It was like a deep, inexplicable chill spreading through me. No wind, no rain, no noise, just her presence in the darkness. My heartbeat sounded deafening in my ears, and it felt like something heavy pressed against my ribs, making each breath a conscious effort. I tried to speak. "Hey, are you all right?" But my voice failed me. The words got stuck, as if they were swallowed by the night itself. My legs refused to obey. It was as if something had frozen every muscle in my body. I wanted to breathe, but it felt like the air had disappeared entirely, leaving only a suffocating emptiness where breath should be. Seconds, or maybe minutes, I can't tell, passed before I managed to take a step back. That small movement broke the tension, and my body snapped back into motion. I began to retreat slowly, eyes never leaving the motionless figure. She remained there, not blinking, unmoving, just existing, as though waiting for something I couldn't understand. When I reached the cemetery gate, my heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it would burst from my chest. I'd never been so frightened in my life. Not in movies, not in any story I'd ever heard. It was a visceral fear that started in my fingertips and has stayed with me ever since. Each time I think back, I can still feel that cold, like ice running through my veins, like I left a piece of myself out there under those twisted trees. I closed the gate, locked it, and never looked back. Even now, when I think about that moment, I still feel that same chill rising up my spine. Not just because I saw something I wasn't supposed to, but because the presence of that woman never blinked, never moved, and never stepped away from that spot. It was as if she belonged to that place in a way that no one alive should. Something about the way she watched didn't feel human. It felt timeless. And that thought is what truly haunts me the most. Since I was a kid, I'd always loved walking through the forest near my home. It was a place where I felt free. The smell of damp earth, the whisper of birdsong, the narrow trails only I knew like the back of my hand. So when I returned home from university that summer before I got a job, I slipped right back into my evening walks. like it was the only familiar thing in a world that felt uncertain. Walking alone after sunset had never bothered me before. But on that particular night, I left later than usual. The sun was already dipping low, painting the sky orange and purple, shadows stretching like long fingers across the trail. I lit a cigarette and didn't even notice how quiet the woods had become, as if someone had turned down the volume on the world. I was only a few steps from the heart of the dense trails when the silence changed. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It felt like sound was being sucked out of the air around me, creating a hollow emptiness. My heart thudded harder with each beat. I stopped walking, straining for even the softest hint of noise. But there was only deep, suffocating stillness. Then I heard it. A dry, brittle snap behind me, like someone crushing twigs underfoot. I turned, expecting to see a small animal. But nothing stirred, except the shadows weaving between the trees. I told myself it was just a deer or fox, something natural, so I kept going, only quicker. Minutes later, as the path narrowed beneath looming branches, I heard another sound. Footsteps, heavier this time, deliberate and closer, like someone stalking me through the darkness. My chest tightened, and a cold wave of fear washed over me. My legs trembled beneath me. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, but that sound didn't fade. It approached, rhythmically matching my steps. My breath came in short, jagged bursts. It felt like someone was watching me just beyond my field of vision, hidden in the shadows that clung to the trees. My mind screamed for me to run, but my feet wouldn't obey at first. Then the footsteps changed, not just following anymore, but synchronizing with mine, as if a presence was just behind me, using the darkness as camouflage. That's when I bolted. I ran through roots and brush, every step stabbing pain into my lungs, driven by a primal need to get out. My eyes were wide and frantic, scanning the darkness for any hint of movement. Every rustle sounded like pursuit. Every breeze felt like breath on my neck. I sprinted toward the distant glow of the parking area, where my car waited like fragile safety. I didn't look back, not until I slammed the car door behind me, hands shaking so violently that I could barely lock it. Only then, from the reflection in the rearview mirror, did I almost allow myself to breathe. Nothing. Just the endless black of trees, silent and still, as if nothing had ever been there. My heart was still pounding as I started the engine. I sat there for long moments, listening to the quiet hum of the idling car. Every passing tree on the drive home triggered a spike of fear in my chest, as though something unseen still trailed me. That night changed me forever. The forest I once loved now felt alive in an unsettling way, like every shadow might conceal something watching, waiting, lingering in silence. Even now, when I hear a twig snap in the quiet, my body reacts before my mind even understands. Why? Because whatever was out there wasn't just an animal in the woods. It was something that wanted me to feel its presence in the dark. I never considered myself the kind of person to feel true dread. I grew up in rural Georgia, spent a lot of time outdoors, and I thought I was pretty tough, until one particular stretch of nights at an old hunting camp changed how I see the world around me. For a few years, I held a hunting lease about 30 minutes from my town. It was miles down a long, overgrown dirt road and completely surrounded by dense woods, the kind of place most folks avoid after dark. There was an old cabin on the property that hadn't been used in years, with moss on the roof and weeds taller than a man in places. I'd always joked that it was creepy, but I'd never felt creepy there until that one season. I used to hunt there alone a lot. I thought of that place as peaceful, the wind in the trees, the distant call of birds, and the quiet that only comes when you're far from town. But no matter how often I went, I never shook the feeling that I wasn't entirely alone out there. At first, I brushed it off as imagination, maybe the wind or nerves. But gradually, that feeling became more pronounced. There was a locked gate at the front of the property, but strangely, it wasn't uncommon to find the gate interior door of the cabin open even when I was sure I'd locked it. The first few times it happened, I thought I must have forgotten, or maybe a neighbor drove through and forgot to shut it behind them. But it kept happening, repeatedly. That alone was unsettling, but what happened next was something else entirely. One evening, I headed out later than usual, around dusk, just to check trail cams and maybe spend a few hours before night truly fell. The woods looked beautiful under the sunset, but there was an odd stillness that night. No wind, no rustle of leaves, just a heavy silence that sat on the land, like something waiting. I told myself I was just tired, or letting my mind wander, but something in the air felt wrong. As darkness crept in, I started back toward the cabin. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not subtle, not distant. Definite, firm footsteps breaking underbrush behind me. I turned quickly, expecting to see a deer bounding off into the trees, but nothing was there. Just shadows. My heartbeat skipped. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe an animal. But the sound didn't feel like an animal. It sounded like human steps. I kept walking, faster now, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds, convinced I'd see someone following me. The thing is, every time I looked, there was nothing. Just shifting darkness and the occasional reflection of moonlight on leaves. But the footsteps never stopped. They kept pace with me, always just behind, ever so slightly out of sight. Eventually, I reached the cabin and fumbled with the keys, heart pounding. I stepped inside, shut the creaky door behind me, and leaned against it with a shaky breath, only to freeze again. Because that sound, it didn't stop. It was on the other side of the wall. Something was around the cabin. It moved quietly now, slow and deliberate, as if it was circling. I didn't know what to do. My phone had almost no signal out there. My truck was parked a short walk away, but the idea of stepping back into that darkness made my skin crawl. My blood felt thick, like fear had settled into every vein. I remember gripping the edge of the table and trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But even then, a deep part of me knew something was out there with me. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I forced myself to step outside again. I needed to get back to my truck, to safety. The air was colder now, and every shadow seemed to shift as the moonlight danced between trees. I didn't hear footsteps anymore, but I felt watched, like something was following me in silence, just staying at the edge of vision. I ran the rest of the way back to my truck. No looking around, no hesitating, just full speed until I reached the driver's door. My hands shook as I unlocked it and slid inside, then locked all 4 doors. I turned the key and drove out of there as fast as I dared, the woods disappearing behind me in a blur of darkness. I never went back after that night. I sold the hunting lease, changed my route, and avoided that road entirely. I've told friends about it, but no one can explain the things that happened. The open doors, the sensation of footsteps in silent woods, the feeling of being followed even when no one was there. Whatever was out there, it wasn't an animal. It wasn't imagination. Something real was on that land with me, and it let me know I wasn't alone.